The relationship between Nanami and Gojo is unfortunately underutilized by Gege in my opinion. They've known each other for a very long time, since even before the hidden inventory flashback. Nanami himself was Gojo's underclassman, but despite the two's long history together, we only ever see the two of them interact during Nanami's initial introduction during the Versus Mahito arc. Every other mention of the two and their relationship by Nanami or Gojo themselves is always kind of post-mortem. For example, we see Gojo discussing Nanami's death during Shibuya just before the Shinjuku showdown begins, stating that he always thought Nanami was the type who would survive one way or the other. We also see in the midst of the Shinjuku showdown, we get a flashback to Nanami himself discussing Gojo's power, saying that Gojo can't be kept up with. Now, why am I bringing this up? Since the reception of my last video regarding the JJK light novels exceeded all my expectations, to be honest, I decided to make this a little series and go through each story from the light novels one by one. Since I've already discussed and explained the first story, which is about Megumi and Yuji following Gojo around on his day off, with that out the way, let's move on to the second story from the first light novel, a story focusing around the dynamic I just described, giving us a bit more time with Nanami and Gojo as the two of them chase down someone who can supposedly sell dolls that raise the dead. This one is a little bit longer than the last, but I still hope you enjoy all the same. So, story number 2, The Resurrection Doll. The story begins with us being told that Nanami is going on a business trip and that he usually doesn't mind business trips. It allows him to go to places he would never really get a chance to see, and on top of that, it gives him a chance to unwind on his own away from colleagues in the Jujutsu world. It gives him a chance to get some fresh air. Page 33. Without fresh air, he got depressed. Nanami keeping up with that edgy emo boy attitude from his youth, then it's revealed to us that the possibility of Nanami enjoying this work trip is exceedingly low, due to the fact that a more experienced sorcerer was accompanying him. And unfortunately for Nanami, but fortunately for me reading and you watching, the sorcerer joining Nanami on this expedition is the one and only honoured one, this goofy mother person. Gojo is joining Nanami on this trip, much to Nanami's annoyance and dismay. I mean, despite the two's storied past, as we see during Nanami's introduction, he has faith in Gojo's strength, but he has no respect for him as a person due to how flippantly he acts towards the rules and regulations of the Jujutsu world. So being on a work trip, trapped with him, is less than ideal for our sorcerer slash salary man. The two sorcerers are walking along, and much to Nanami's chagrin, Gojo keeps talking about random stuff, like how he likes buttered potatoes. Nanami all the while is confused and irritated by the presence of the honoured one. Page 34. You lie more often than you breathe. It cuts down on carbon dioxide emissions, no? The amount of CO2 from my size cancels it out, Nanami said. Two sorcerers coming all the way to Hokkaido together is kind of sad. It's alright, it's like we're on a variety show. What variety show could be this annoying? The expressions on their faces couldn't have been more different as the two sorcerers walked down bustling Odori Avenue. As Gojo and Nanami are exploring Sapporo in Hokkaido, the narrator remarks how the locale is pretty much grid-like and is almost impossible to get lost, looking similar to a Go board. However, Gojo then proceeds to pull a pamphlet out of his pocket. Upon closer inspection, it seems to be a map of Sapporo's central ward, and it's curiously covered in red circles in numerous locations all over the area. As Gojo reveals this map, he states that the grid-like nature of the locations makes it difficult to plan a route. Nanami goes curious as to what route he means. Why are these red circles all over the map? So he asks, page 34 again, what's with the map? Huh? Nanami, huh? That's really annoying. Get your act together, man, Gojo said. Think about it. What else could this be but Satoru Gojo's map of sweets? Feel free to do that on your own too. I try to conduct myself like a mentor, but you don't look up to me because you've never been someone worth looking up to, Nanami said. This small snippet of their conversation, I feel, perfectly encapsulates the relationship we see between the two veteran sorcerers. At least the relationship we see on the surface. Gojo's insistent narcissism met with Nanami's cold and straight-laced demeanour. I mean, this is reflected perfectly during Nanami's introduction in the main series, Nanami acting as the straight man to Gojo's flippant and facetious nature, despite his strength as the strongest of the modern era. The two are complete polar opposites, but due to their strength as sorcerers, their past together, as well as them both being active on missions, they are always drawn together, and I feel like the narrator perfectly describes this to us when describing how the two interact with each other, as well as Nanami's distaste for Gojo's personality, despite Gojo's higher level of power. Page 35. Nanami sighed so hard his lungs seemed ready to collapse. In personal conversations with Gojo, 90% of the things out of the sorcerer's mouth were nonsense. Gojo could only ever talk on his own wavelength. Responding in earnest was exhausting, but letting him ramble on was irritating. Gojo outranked him, was senior to him, and far surpassed him in strength and skill. Those who knew him well understood the significant inner distress this caused Nanami. After being annoyed by Gojo for so long, Nanami realizes something. That this mission is something he could more than likely complete on his own. Why does the strongest sorcerer, the great Satoru Gojo, even need to tag along? Gojo admits that Nanami should be more than capable of handling the situation if it's as advertised. However, Gojo has heard that a high-level curse user may be involved with this mission. Okay, little cut in. Just for clarification, I'm going to give you a quick definition here because it's important to make the distinction between a sorcerer and a curse user because a lot of people get it confused. So, a curse user is basically a sorcerer who isn't part of Jujutsu Tech or any of the sorcerer clans, right? So when the term is used, think Geto's family like Laru and Miguel, as well as Awasaka and Ogami. If you're not a sorcerer, but you're a human who can use cursed energy, you're a curse user most of the time. Pretty self-explanatory, but it can still get a little bit confusing. Anyway, back to Nanami x Gojo, page 35 again. I agree there's nothing to worry about, it's a solo investigation, and you're fully capable of handling it. Then why did you come? To turn a simple job into an utterly simple job, Gojo said. One person may be enough for the situation, and a grade 1 at that, right? But I've heard a nasty curse user or something of the sort could be involved. You're saying we're up against a curse user equal to a grade 1 or special grade? It's just a possibility. You aren't the kind of person who would come all the way here for a mere possibility, Nanami said. Your perceptiveness is striking. Oh well, that's enough for now, isn't it? Maybe I'm just tired from my busy lifestyle and I need a vacation up north. Nanami then attempts to get some more details about what's actually happening regarding this mission, but Gojo stonewalls him and just points to the distance. Remember that artwork I put on screen? That artwork is for this story, and this is where it comes in. Gojo points to something in the distance and tells Nanami to look. Nanami goes along with Gojo's insistence, only to realize that he was pointing at someone selling buttered potatoes. As soon as Nanami realizes what he's looking at, Gojo's already ordered 2 of them. So the pair sit on a nearby bench and eat at their buttered potatoes. They discuss stuff about potatoes, and I'm being serious, there's about a page or 2 of Gojo and Nanami just talking about potatoes, so despite it sounding humorous, we're just going to kind of go past it since there isn't too much to discuss about it, except for the fact that the two can have a normal conversation without it just being Gojo yelling and Nanami being annoyed at that. Then the two start walking and discuss more about this investigation. Whilst the two are also eating ice cream, Gojo of course going for something sweet, while Nanami chose a cheese and milk twist ice cream, and that sounds absolutely diabolical to me. That sounds grim. Cheese flavoured ice cream does not sound good. Anyway, Gojo all the while is asking questions about the investigation from Nanami, which doesn't make much sense. Page 39. Normally Gojo would have known about the mission and wouldn't have to ask Nanami. The fact that he did meant he hadn't gotten any info beforehand. In other words, Gojo had known this mission wasn't important enough for his participation, but he had come along anyway. Nanami knew Gojo was busy and wouldn't come to the North Country just to kill time. He wondered what Gojo's real purpose was. Nanami then decides his best option is to just give Gojo a quick explanation to catch him up with the situation, explaining that it's a website. Page 39 again. It's on an independent server to avoid search engines, but Ichiji was able to track it down. The man's got skills. Gojo's matter-of-fact tone suggests he expected nothing less. I do really like this quote from Gojo. It's a nice little call forward, in a sense, to Gojo's statements about Ichiji that we see during Shinjuku, about him being the person he trusts most. I feel like it shows Gege has all these character relationships in his head, planned out from the start, but he never shows them in the manga. And with this supplementary stuff we get from the light novels, we finally get little glimpses of that, like the trust between Gojo and Ichiji. The two continue to discuss the website and the curse user, how the website is basically, you fill in a form, you send in a request, the website then gives you an address to mail your payment to. The address shown leads to a small share house in Hokkaido, nowhere of real note. However, on the website it will randomly display 1 of 20 PO boxes. By the sounds of it so far, there doesn't really seem to be anything related to a cursed user. It seems more like a scam than anything curse related. So Gojo asks what this website actually sells that would result in Nanami being sent in to investigate. If it was cursed tools for fly heads or someone taking orders to curse people, it wouldn't warrant sending Nanami in, a grade 1. So what's so dangerous that the higher-ups sent Nanami to investigate while also not informing Gojo on what he's looking for? Page 41. Resurrections of the dead. Say what? Gojo didn't often doubt his ears but what Nanami just said was ridiculous. Despite the two sorcerers agreeing that the dolls are 99% fake, in all actuality. However, that 1% possibility has the veterans proceeding to investigate. Upon finding out, however, that these dolls may have the chance to bring back the dead, Gojo realizes the reason the higher-ups kept the details of the mission a secret to him. They don't want any possibility of Sukuna's vessel to be revived. And given the fact that Gojo sees Yuji as this potentially strong ally and student for him to help grow, Gojo doesn't want Yuji to be executed. However, chronologically, this story takes place just before Nanami's introduction, meaning at this point in JJK, the higher-ups think that Yuji is dead. So from the perspective of the higher-ups, if these dolls and their abilities were real, Gojo would be able to revive Sukuna's vessel against the higher-ups' wishes. Despite Gojo himself saying that he is 100% sure that the doll's abilities aren't real, he is still infuriated that the higher-ups would keep him in the dark and that they believed Gojo would even stoop low enough to believing in such a rumour if it meant he could revive Yuji. But as I say, at this point in the timeline, Yuji is thought to be dead by the higher-ups. This is more clearly explained later, but I'll get to that point. Page 42. Those scumbags intent on burying Sukuna's vessel? They want to keep me in the dark, huh? Gojo said. So you understand? They misjudge me. Do they really think I'd rely on something like this? Gojo says that he doesn't really think these dolls are the real deal. I mean, as he says, if these dolls were really capable of bringing back the dead, the world as we know it would come to an end. Which is pretty much true. And we look at the main story of Jujutsu Kaisen, look at Kenjaku reviving all these people back from the dead. It has nearly brought the entire world to absolute catastrophe, with Kenjaku intimidating the leaders of the world on top of the merger still needing to be released, as well as Sukuna destroying entire cities. So Gojo is far from wrong when saying this. It's just ironic that it is Gojo saying it, because Gojo is, you know, the person who changed the world irreparably through him simply being born, raising the power ceiling as well as striking fear into curse users everywhere. He knows what can throw the power balance of the world into absolute disequilibrium, and from that alone he knows these dolls probably aren't real due to the fact that, you know, the world would know if they were real. Page 43. Even though the claim of resurrecting the dead is itself highly dubious, Gojo said, that doesn't mean I can just let it go. Work is work. Gojo looked up as he nibbled on his cone. Ice cream had dripped onto his thumb and he licked it off. The expression on his face as he peered at Nanami through his sunglasses was one of exhaustion. As the two continue walking, Gojo asks Nanami, which was better, being a salaryman or a sorcerer? Which one was crappier? Gojo, here, feeling as if he's asking for a recommendation for a job change. Nanami remarks how it just depends on whether or not you're cut out for it. But beyond that, the difference between the two jobs to Nanami was negligible. But, however, Nanami jokes and says that being a salaryman may have been better because it doesn't involve Gojo. Gojo and Nanami then give the person making these dolls a pretty apt title when discussing him. The title of the Doll Maker. Pretty on the nose name, but it sticks. The location of the Doll Maker is seemingly underground, under the main city of Sapporo. Under the main city lies an underground city filled with libraries, kiosks, convenience stores, hair salons, and if the two are lucky, a doll maker. But as the two explore this city, they can feel how stagnant the air is around here. The sheer volume of people in this labyrinth, the mixing of emotions, it makes tracking anything with cursed energy super easy for Gojo. Gojo and Nanami then go to a place away from this underground city's centre, a place with side passages and alleys along each street, until the duo come across a peculiar scene. Page 45. The two sorcerers were looking at a mother holding a baby. A boy, about 5 or 6, stood at her side. To make a short story a little bit shorter for the sake of my sanity, the young boy by the woman's side starts screaming at his mother, saying that he isn't a big brother, the baby in her arms isn't his brother. The mother of these children, with an almost fanatical love for her little one within her arms, takes the love she has for this baby and turns it into anger aimed towards her eldest son, raising her hand to strike the child, until she is stopped by the interfering Nanami. These two complete strangers move closer towards this woman to glean more about the situation, as the woman cries and screams to be let go, and how this is none of their business. Page 47. Gojo was leaning in to peer at the baby in the mother's arms. I wonder what we find. And there it is. He looked up at Nanami. Selling such a thing and calling it resurrection is the height of fraudulence. As Gojo and Nanami inspect closer, it's clear that this is a doll, not a newborn in the woman's arms, as the mother screams how she gave birth to both of her children, frantically aiming to shoo these men away from her children. She gave birth to them. They are her kids. She gave birth to her baby. Page 47 again. No. You bought it, right? Nanami said. The woman freezes in her acknowledgement of Nanami's words. It is a cursed corpse. The woman is confused by the term as the two men are discussing it, but it's clear that the woman herself, despite being in possession of this thing, has no knowledge of sorcery or curses or anything of the like. Nanami explains to this woman that it's a doll, a surprisingly lifelike and well-made doll, but a doll all the same. And that of all people, she must be aware of this fact since she was the one who bought it. Page 48. The baby was indeed well crafted. It wiggled its arms and legs as its pink cheeks trembled. It was a textbook example of all the traits that would awaken motherly instincts, but that's merely how it appeared to most people. To a sorcerer's eyes, it was hideous. Nanami attempts to subtly question this clearly broken woman into what the cost was to attempt to revive her child, until Gojo interjects. Page 48. I bet you had to fork over the corpse of the brat you wanted to revive. Gojo's lack of tact and sympathy disappoint Nanami, but given the expression on this grieving woman's face, Gojo's accusation was right on the mark. The reason this doll was so lifelike was due to the fact that pieces of the child's original corpse would have been used to recreate its visage. Whilst Gojo seems overly cold and harsh here, it is noted by the narrator that he acted in such a seemingly cruel way to alleviate this burden from Nanami, since he was clearly having difficulty questioning this grieving mother, something Gojo has zero issues with. They push forward in their questioning and the mother screams how they're lying, saying that if she paid money, her baby would be brought back. To which Nanami explains to the woman that it's her own prerogative. If she wants to stay in the past, she can. Nanami hasn't lost a child, so he has no right to tell her how she lives her life. However, the child clinging to her legs was trying to warn her. That's not his brother. She knows this. She knows Nanami is speaking the truth and hands over the cursed corpse made from the remnants of her child. Page 50. She had regained what she lost, only to lose it again. The two put the cursed doll in a bag and continue to explore the city in pursuit of its creator, which isn't too difficult given Gojo's prowess regarding tracking due to the abilities of the Six Eyes. Tracking the residual cursed energy left on the doll, they come to an area hidden in this underground city, hidden via a barrier which is described to be similar to a curtain. They then find the dollmaker's hideout and kick down the door. The dollmaker himself shoots up, alerted at the two veterans approaching. He questions them, asking who they are. Page 51. We're sorcerers. Proper ones. Unlike you, Gojo's tone bore an unusual degree of contempt. Upon closer inspection, this cursed user seems like nothing more than a hack, adorned in clothes similar to a Shinto priest or onmyoji, aka an old-school Japanese wizard. The robes he's wearing themselves covered in seals with small pieces of cursed energy exuding from them. His room filled with tacky souvenirs to give the air of a sorcerer to those who come to him in desperation. Page 52. Sorcerers? I see you're sorcerers too. What do you mean too? Surely you don't count yourself among sorcerers, Gojo exclaimed. Nanami probably felt the same way. The crease on his forehead was deep and it expressed a visceral hatred for the dollmaker's existence and his crimes. Their anger reaching a boiling point, they trap the dollmaker, blocking the exit with their bodies as they push forward towards him, allowing him no escape, until something takes Nanami by surprise. The dollmaker falls to his knees and clings onto Nanami's legs in fear. He cries for help. He's glad they're here. Gojo and Nanami realize the cursed energy coming from this man is far too weak. His cursed energy was so weak, it would be a stretch to call him a cursed user. So weak, in fact, he could be defeated easily by a single first-year student, let alone Nanami and Gojo in tandem. Page 53. We thought he was cursing people for sport, but turns out he's a victim himself. The man suddenly shifts and rips the seals covering his claws. Arm-like appendages shoot out from his body. Nanami dodges until said appendages release insect-like creatures from their tips. The arms themselves swinging around like whips. The dollmaker's body is changing. He's becoming a doll of flesh. The only parts of his body that retain a somewhat human appearance are his left arm and his head, whilst the rest of his figure is a writhing, contorted mass, all the while a doll head burrows and bites into his heart. The dollmaker screams and cries for help, offering the two men money to save him, his body writhing in agony as he uncontrollably attacks Nanami. Nanami also realizes that the arms attempting to strike him were a non-issue. However, the insect-like creatures that have burrowed into the dollmaker's skin are swelling inside his stomach. Nanami looks even closer. He in turn realizes that these aren't insects, they are cursed corpses. His body is being turned into a cursed corpse factory. They've been devouring this man's body slowly. Gojo chimes in, page 54. I've been wondering what happens to the flesh left over after you use the skin from the cursed corpses to make cursed dolls for the parents. Now I see you were using it to replace your own consumed flesh, said Gojo. Despite the man's agony, the two proceed to go in depth and discuss this man's motives and possible history, saying that he may be from an old line of sorcerers who pulled out a cursed tool out of storage, or he just simply found an unmanageable cursed object. But even still, the doll maker's intentions were never good. He still created the website and made these fake resurrections for monetary gain. So arguing that he was under extenuating circumstances won't cut it for Nanami and Gojo. Page 55. A doll that feasted on human flesh to produce more dolls, and a doll maker who gathered dead bodies to replace his own consumed flesh. He couldn't keep up and was eventually possessed by this doll. None of it should have existed in this world. Nanami and Gojo wore the same look on their faces. It expressed a grim resignation. Nanami then shows his hand to the doll maker, explaining the 7-3 ratio technique, strengthening the technique itself. He charges at the doll maker, pitying the state he is in now, but also stating that he's in this position due to him wanting monetary gain above all. It's his own fault. The doll maker pleads and says that he saved people's hearts by reviving their dead. Nanami, not faltering, said that he was spreading curses to other people. The dollmaker realizes he has no other options left. Though transformed into this contorted mess of doll-like limbs and wooden bones, he throws himself at Nanami, screaming that he will kill him. Nanami merely states that the dollmaker should act like an adult and take responsibility for your actions. Nanami swings so swiftly and with such precision that the man doesn't even release his final breath. The dollmaker's body slowly falls apart into two pieces, in the perfect ratio of a 7-3. All the small insect creatures within the dollmaker shake and rattle until they grow still. Gojo congratulates his grade 1 cohort on a good job. Nanami retorts that it would have been easier if Gojo just did it himself. Gojo then replies that Nanami's technique is much more suited to give the man a human death. The two then leave the area, request a cleanup for what's left of the dollmaker. The final scene in this story cuts to us seeing the two men in a bar, discussing the recent events as well as Gojo's actual reason for joining Nanami on this excursion. Said discussion also tells us when in the JJK timeline of events this story actually takes place. Nanami starts the night by drinking a Gimle cocktail, whilst Gojo drinks a Florida, which is non-alcoholic and a nice callback to Gojo being stated to be not much of a drinker in the fanbook. Gojo discusses how Nanami is good at shutting things out, just like his actions with the dollmaker, and in the future, his students will eventually face off against something similar. Gojo knows this, but his students, unlike Nanami, don't have the means to shut these kinds of things out. They're too sensitive, and if Megumi, Nobara, or Yuji face something like that, it could break their hearts. Nanami, initially confused by this conversation, changes his tone and listens carefully as he realizes Gojo isn't wearing his signature goofy smile or his laid-back demeanor. The two glasses now empty, Gojo orders 2 Cinderellas, also non-alcoholic and really sweet, much to Nanami's dismay and disbelief. Page 59. There's a kid I want you to look after at some point. Is it Fushiguro? Yuji Tadori. You know him? I heard he died, Nanami said. He harbours the King of Curses, which is a far cry from some charlatan using dolls to bring back the dead. This line in particular tells us that this story is after Yuji's initial death, but before the Goodwill event, and of course, before Nanami's introduction, given the fact that Nanami thought Yuji was dead and hasn't met him yet. So this story takes place relatively early on in the series. The bartender places the pair of cocktail glasses in front of the sorcerers, and Nanami interjects. Page 59 again. I know you hate the Jujutsu world at the moment, but I side with regulations now. I don't know what you have in mind regarding Sukuna's vessel, but I don't mean Sukuna's vessel, Gojo said. I'm talking about Yuji Itadori. His situation is not so simple that we can ignore the obvious when talking about him. Gojo then describes his newbie sorcerer that has come under his tutelage. He's determined, brave, and decisive in a fight, but he's a bit too uptight, and Gojo believes that will eventually break his heart. Page 60. I need someone who understands the suffering people go through. Someone like you. Did you come all this way to sweet talk me? Well, you know how much I have a taste for sweets. Laughing, Gojo tilted his glass towards Nanami. The story ends with the two of them drinking into the night. Overall, I very much enjoyed this story. It demonstrates Gojo's evolved philosophy after Geto defected, and he acknowledges Nanami, as well as his experience and the realities he has had to endure as a Jujutsu sorcerer. It shows how much Gojo trusts and respects Nanami, trusting him just like Ichiji with the info that Yuji is alive, and also trusting Nanami to teach Yuji as well. We get to see more of the dynamic between these long-term colleagues, as well as see and hear the level of trust between these two men. And Gojo suggesting that Yuji's good-hearted nature will cause him pain in the future is quite an apt thing for Gojo to say, given that as soon as Nanami meets Yuji, Yuji will be forced to see the harsh realities of what it means to be a sorcerer, Junpei, Nobara, and Nanami himself. The story itself is slow to start and the climax was a bit short, but in conclusion I like this story. And just like the previous one, it's not overly complex. Gojo and Nanami go on a business trip. They eat some potatoes, they go to an underground city, stop a mother from hurting her child, find a person who's taking advantage of grieving mothers who've lost their children and is stealing their flesh, finish off said person who steals baby flesh, then go to the bar and finish the night off by talking about Yuji. Also, if you couldn't tell, the artwork I used from earlier is from Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade, the Japan-only mobile game. It has some artwork from the light novel stories, which is pretty cool. Just wish it was a global mobile game instead of just being JP only, but yeah, whatever. So yeah, that's the end of this story. Let me know if you want more. We have plenty more stories to go through. I think it's about 7 more. The next one of which being about Mahito and the other disaster curses before we really see them in the main series. It's pretty interesting, so let me know if you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you want more. Doodles, my doodles. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.